Hi, I'm Cailey, a librarian here at Mentor Public Library.
And I'm Meg, also a librarian, and welcome to this week's edition of All Booked Up with Cailey and Meg, where each week we give you different book recommendations on a specific theme. This week, we're going to be looking at adult tearjerkers. So sometimes, oh, I know, it's so sad. Sometimes it just feels good to cry, and
Yes.
these books will definitely get you to that place, we believe.
Yes, definitely. And all of the books that we talk about today are available at the library as well as online through Overdrive and Hoopla.
All right, Cailey, what's your first tearjerker?
So, first, I have to say that trying to pick a book today made me realize that I cry at books a lot. I
Yes.
think I am very sensitive, and
Yeah.
I realized that there are a lot of books that have made me cry.
Yeah.
But so these two in particular that I'm going to talk about today have definitely given me
Great.
that good cry.
Yeah.
So the first one I'm going to talk about is called The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry by Rachel Joyce. And this book has made me cry 3 times now. I read it once on my own, and then I read it 2 more times with my book clubs at the library.
Yeah.
So this book came out within the last 10 years, so it's not very old, but it's a little older. And it is a British title. Harold Fry is an older gentleman. He has recently been forced to retire from his longtime job at the brewery. And he and his wife live a very sort of boring, predictable day to day life in Knightsbridge, England. And they live in relative silence, with Maureen always waiting for a visit from their son David that never really comes, and Harold just kind of living day to day.
Mm.
On a pretty boring morning one day, Harold gets the mail to find a surprising letter from his old coworker, Queenie Hennessy, who he has not talked to in over 20 years, and who had done some very kind things for Harold back then, and he feels like he never really thanked her for them. And unfortunately, Queenie has written her letter to tell Harold that she is dying of cancer. And she's in a hospice facility in Berwick upon Tweed, which is quite far from where Harold lives. And Harold immediately writes a letter back to her and sets off to go send it to her. And along the way, realizes that a letter is just not enough, and he keeps walking. And he decides that he is going to walk all the way to Queenie to hand deliver his letter, because he feels like if he keeps walking, Queenie will keep on living.
Mm.
Along the way, there's a whole lot of things that happen, of course, because this is quite a long journey. One of which is that Harold is simply not prepared for walking such a long trip. He left the house in his yachting shoes and a sort of windbreaker jacket. So he winds up with some broken shoes. He doesn't have a phone with him. He walks through all sorts of weather, and he also winds up with some unexpected company and, meeting up with some new people. At one point, he even becomes somewhat of an internet celebrity sensation. He's on the news because people start joining him on his walk, and he's like all of a sudden this cause that people are keeping track of. But through his whole journey, Harold kind of reflects upon his life, his courtship with Maureen, their life with their son David, all the ups and downs at work, and his relationship with Queenie and some other people, and it just really kind of gets to you and sneaks up on you as the story goes on. And Harold holds back some things that are revealed that really just, Niagara Falls. But this book is just a fabulous read. It's unlike anything else I'd ever read. And every time I have read it, I've discovered new things or kind of new hints at things as it goes on. And it's really kind of refreshing at times, because this whole thing is that he wants to go talk to his friend one more time. And he also analyzes himself along the way. And it just gets to me.
Oh, Yeah, you're that one. You're selling that to me. I have not read that one, but it
But
sounds.
now you're gonna.
But now I'm gonna. So thank you, Kate. No, oh man, that sounds good. And mine also takes place in England, and it also centers around like a retired person. So I think we're touched by the same things, Cailey. I think. um, Mine is called The Lido by Libby Page. And it is the story of a tender friendship that develops between two women, 60 years apart in age, amidst life's sorrows. So, our main character is 86-year-old Rosemary, and she lives in the Brixton neighborhood of London. And she is best known by locals as the woman who spends a lot of time doing laps at the Lido. And I did not know what Lido meant initially. It is apparently it's a British term for a public outdoor swimming pool. So she's at this community place. She's there all the time, but not just for any reason, not just because she enjoys swimming. This is where all of her most cherished memories are held. She grew up in the area and she learned to swim at the Lido during the war. As a young person, she had a lot of emotional memories of wartime and also just learning to swim during that time. But it's also where she met the love of her life, the man she married and spent her whole life with, and like their first kiss was there.
Aw.
And he's now deceased, so she's now a widow, and so she almost just doesn't want to let go of this place because so many good things happened here. Even as it kind of increases her grief, she still wants to be there all the time. Well, one day at the Lido, she meets a 26-year-old young woman named Kate, who is an aspiring journalist. And so while Rosemary's grieving, Kate has some pain as well. She's lonely. She has like an estranged relationship with her sister. And she also just deals with some anxiety and depression and her feeling like she's not really fulfilled in her work. But she comes to the Lido for, at first, a professional reason. She's there to cover a story about a big corporation that wants to purchase the Lido and turn it from a public place into this very private, snooty, you have to pay to be a member type of place. So she wants to report on this and save the Lido. So she wants to interview people who are there all the time. And one of those people is Rosemary. So as she interviews Rosemary to get to know her better, what at first begins as this professional endeavor, really becomes a reckoning for both of them for their long held memories and pain. And they just kind of comfort each other and reveal a lot of things to each other that it really just, the reason that kind of story would make me cry is just the compassion for like suffering at all stages of life. It's not just an old person experience or a young person. It's like every person has things they're dealing with, has, baggage. And I just like the honesty of dealing with that. And it's a very touching relationship, I think, that they share.
That sounds really sweet. I should look that one up too.
Yeah.
So my next title is historical fiction,
Okay.
The Girl You Left Behind by
Mhm.
Jojo Moyes.
Oh, Jojo Moyes. Oh, she makes me cry. You
She
before
makes
me.
she makes everyone cry. Me before you. Yes, she makes
You before
everyone
you.
cry.
Yes. Oh,
And I will say that one, oh, that's a multiple tissue book. Me before you.
yes. Yes.
And The Girl You Left Behind might be for you too. Um,
Oh.
so this is historical fiction,
Okay.
and it actually starts off with Sophie Lefebvre, who is in northern France in the midst of World War One, and she lives in an area occupied by Germans, and her
Mm.
and her sister are just sort of scraping by, helping their family survive. Both women's husbands are out on the front, and they don't hear from them very often because with the German occupation, messages and mail and stuff is very infrequent. And her husband, Sophie's husband, Edouard, was a painter. And her one comfort is a painting that he made of her early on in their relationship. Flash forward to 2006, and that painting hangs in the home of Liv, who is a younger woman who was suddenly widowed when her husband passed away in his 30s. And she's had this painting for many years, and all of a sudden it has become the center of a restitution claim.
Right.
And Liv has to fight for this because it reminds her of her late husband, and she believes that it's hers. She's owned it for years. But then she finds out a lot more about Sophie and what happened during World War I, and isn't quite sure anymore what is right and what is wrong. And this book is super unique in the way it's told because a lot of historical fiction these days kind of jumps between time points.
Right.
Especially like it's especially common in historical fiction nowadays to have someone several years, generations later even, and jump back and forth between the two. In
Right.
this case, this book starts off and it's all Sophie's story right from the beginning. And you get to sort of a point where it's kind of a cliffhanger, and
Yeah.
then it jumps to Liv. And it's almost like it's a completely different book. And it takes a little while to sort of connect the dots as to why you're learning both stories. But as Liv finds out more about Sophie, you kind of find out more about what happened to Sophie after the author suddenly dropped her off. And it's really about both women and how they've dealt with their different griefs and struggles.
Yeah.
But it's also very interesting to talk about restitution from the First World War, which is not something that you hear about very often. So I knew very little about restitution cases, and this book really did enlighten me on quite a bit. And it's ultimately like a story of like, sometimes there is no black and white, right and wrong,
Yeah.
and that gray area is where some of these stories live. So I definitely recommend picking this one up if you're a fan of historical fiction, and of
Yeah.
course, if you need a good cry.
A good cry. Oh man. Yeah. Oh, breaking my heart just thinking about it. I know Jojo Moyes can make you cry.
Absolutely.
So yeah. Well, my last tearjerker is one I read a long time ago, but it's still sometimes even thinking about it can make me sad, and that is Flowers for Algernon by
Oh,
Daniel Keyes. That's an old one, but it was one of the first ones that came to my mind, and it's told in diary format. Is about Charlie, and Charlie works at a bakery. He you would call maybe mentally challenged or low IQ. And he gets this opportunity to be part of this test where his brain gets operated on that could potentially increase his IQ by a lot. So he is very enthusiastic and he volunteers for this and he gets the operation and it works like really good to the point where he becomes smarter than the doctors who operated on him.
oh,
So it's really fascinating to watch each diary entry and how his voice changes over all these diary entries. So it's fascinating on that level, but it's really heartrending, really on multiple levels. One, at the beginning of the book, Charlie pretty much is bullied for his low IQ by his coworkers, and that just like really makes you feel for him immediately, want to like run to his defense, and really can make you cry because it's just so, you just hate to see someone treated like that. So that's like cry number one. Like there's multiple cries here, and then cry number two is the animal component. I'm especially vulnerable to getting sad about innocent animals and the things that they can go through. So Algernon, from the title, Flowers for Algernon, is the name of the mouse who is experimented on before Charlie. He gets the same operation as Charlie, just a little bit before. And his success, like where Algernon gets like really becomes a really smart mouse, is the basis for Charlie being allowed to get his surgery. So Charlie kind of follows Algernon in his development as well. So, you just get worried about him because he's like tested on, and then things happen to Algernon throughout. I won't say exactly what, but there's just, oh, the animals. I hate it when he goes through things. So that's cry number two. And then finally, just all the things that Charlie goes through as he gets smarter and smarter. The whole book kind of just makes you think about how people treat each other based off of like what they can do, like their performance level, as opposed to just being a human being and just loving them for who they are. So almost seeing Charlie being kind of used in that way throughout the book just really makes me sad. But it's really just an inspiring read as well, just because it just makes you feel, even though it makes you feel sad, it just makes you feel love in a big way as well. So definitely a book to make you cry, but you'll feel love in the end as well.
Well, that's good. I mean, sometimes the cry is not so much for something sad, although it sounds
Yeah,
like there's a little bit of that. But, sometimes there's
I don't want to
happy
spoil it,
tears.
but there's like
Um,
things happen. So
yeah, but sometimes there's happy tears in books too.
yes, yes,
But yeah, I think that definitely, if you're looking for a tearjerker, we've got some good recommendations. And also,
yes,
I have so many apparently.
right. I
I
know.
just
Oh,
kept finding more and more. Oh, that one made me cry. Oh, that one made
yeah,
me cry.
yeah, I know. Yeah, so we could do like four, no, I'm not kidding, four videos or something. And
We could revisit this theme sometime.
yes,
Thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully, we gave you some books for your to read list when you need a good cry.
yes.
All
Bye
right,
bye.
we'll see you next time. Happy reading.
All right.